today we're going to talk about using assessments to improve your programs. And we do have a folder of resources for you that you can download, which we got there before. I'm Dr. Lisa Kidder. I work in the ITRC. I've been on the University Assessment Review Committee, I think 7 years. So making sure that assessment connects with the quality work that we do to make sure that connects, and also to represent ITRC and things that we can do to support assessment there. And Ryan is my co-presenter.
Yeah, hi, I'm Ryan Randall. I'm also with the ITRC. I've been here for I think about 3 years now, and previous to being here at the ITRC, I was an instruction librarian at the College of Western Idaho. And as part of being the instruction librarian, I was the only one with that role, and I was on the Gen Ed committee for the college. So I helped do that sort of, not technically a program because they didn't give degrees through the library, but they did assess learning outcomes across different courses and different programs. So it's, I'd say, more than roughly analogous, but it's not exactly the same thing. But so that's some of the experience I have with assessment beyond the boundaries of a single course. So if you haven't already opened up the link that you're seeing, all the folks who are just joining us online, welcome. Thank you so much for joining this Using Program Assessment Results to Improve Programs presentation and workshop. Right now, what you can see on the screen is a link. You could either, if you've got a device, you can use the big QR code, or if you'd prefer, you can type in the link and that will take you to a folder that we have where you can watch these slides if you want to be able to control them instead of just follow along as we do. Or also, we're going to have some case studies that we're going to discuss later on. So if you could go ahead and start loading this folder up now, you'll be able to have those case studies in different Google documents ready to go when we get to that portion. So that's why we're sharing this strange black and white grid with you, if you're not familiar with those. But what we'd like to talk about first is the workshop assessment. I mean, the principles that we'll be talking about in this workshop. So the focus on this one, these are ISU's 5 principles of assessment. You can find these at isu.edu/assessment. And briefly, what they are clarity, faculty-driven design, equity and inclusion, continuous improvement, and stakeholder involvement. And as the slide design probably helps make clear, number 4 is the one we're going to focus on today. That's why it's all bold and in a bigger font. So I'll read that one aloud in its entirety. Continuous improvement, which here means results are derived from student learning outcomes. Sorry, results derived from student learning outcomes are used to improve student learning and enhance program quality. So that's what we're going to be focusing on today, is making sure to use those learning outcomes and make them actionable. So when we think about continuous improvement, those results that you get from the student learning outcomes are used to improve student learning and also to enhance the program quality. So the challenge of this kind of program level assessment is moving from just collecting data to actually making meaningful action. And so today what we're going to focus on is using a systematic approach to analyze that data and also to take action. And Lisa will tell us more about sort of a context for this.
So to prepare for this, we took last year's annual reports and did a summary of the most common weaknesses in all of the annual reports from last year, based on the feedback that we received at the various different departments. So things like misaligned assessments, sample sizes were limiting, over-reliance on course grades. Over on the right-hand side, you'll see weak feedback loops, unclear use of results, no changes planned despite that there's data, established programs aren't using data, missing documentation of improvement actions, and this workshop is meant to address all of those in bold. We know, you'll notice that two of those, it's like, you probably are doing these things. It's just about documenting it. So you probably did make changes or planned to make changes, but it just didn't get into the report. So this is partly, one, acknowledging how you look at reports and how you can move things forward. So the focus of this workshop is our objectives. So next slide. So we're going to look at analyzing assessment data, developing specific plans, and then how to document this closing the loop in your assessment cycle. So first steps, let's see, I think, Ryan, you have the next one.
Okay, I wasn't sure if you were going to start talking about them or not, so I didn't want to step on your toes if you decided to. So the assessment data process is 3 different steps. It is collect, analyze, and act. And so for collect, that's gather meaningful, actionable assessment data. Analyze means here, identify patterns, trends, and insights. And then act means implement specific improvements based on your findings. And we're going to go in detail into each of those steps for the next few minutes. So for step 1, collect. Here, what this is going to mean is effective data collection. So the principles here for meaningful data collection are making sure to align your assessment methods with your learning outcomes. Also, whenever possible, use direct measures. Collect data that can lead to actionable insights. Consider your sample size and the representation. Organize your data for effective analysis. And make sure to document your collection methods clearly. So now let's go ahead and look at, as we were talking about those case studies, go ahead and open up the psychology one and read through it. Take about 5 minutes or so to read through it. And then what we're going to do is just sort of discuss what seems obvious that this isn't our actual psychology department. We just came up with case studies, but that sounded plausible. So what we're going to do is look at this fictional made up case study of the psychology department, how they did their data collection, and then we're going to talk about a few different features of it. And I don't have a timer that I can share on the screen, but I just set one on my watch. So I assure you that in about 3 minutes from now, we will start talking about this. So I'm looking at people in the room, and it seems like people are looking up as if they're done. We've got about another minute left, so I'm gonna make sure that um, give slower readers a little bit more time. But remember, you're just reading for comprehension here. You're not looking for a critique. Christine, do you have a question, or are you just sort of saying that you're done with the reading?
I was trying to say I was done.
Okay, I thought so, but I wasn't sure. Sometimes I've seen people hit the wrong icon, so I just wanted to make sure to invite questions if you had one at the moment. So, okay, if everyone seems to be done, we won't linger here. So let's go ahead and does anybody want to share what they think were some of the things that make this data collection effective?
I noticed some random sampling, so that's one factor.
Yep. Thanks. Thanks. And how do we think the collection method aligns with the learning outcome here?
Not sure I understand the question, but the assignments in the course have rubrics that are measured in this final assessment, and that's what you're scoring or looking at.
Right, right. Yeah, so we're making sure that one of the things that we're trying to assess, we're not, if one of the main things that we're concerned about with the program is how they do with the research proposal and how the thesis is done, we're not concerned so much at seeing how their citations are done. Like that's also important. We hope they get to have that done well by the end of the program, but that's not what we're the assessment's focusing on at the moment, or the data collection. So, and does anybody have, even though I assured you that you were reading for comprehension, not for critique, does anybody happen to have ideas about how the data collection could be improved at this point? No is a fine answer, but I just wanted to give people time to say if they did.
All right, so in this example for the psychology department, they collected some data, and so now we're gonna look at analyze. So really taking a moment to analyze. I hope you also recognize that our examples are in the ISU APRA template, so you get some familiarity with that. So in terms of some principles for analyzing your data, you look for patterns, both within the data and across data, so several years, making sure that you use multiple data points, making sure that you're able to compare and build that in as you look at things, but also looking to compare improvement, decreases, things like that. There should be a context for your data as well. So that's part of the template, some of your appendices in terms of your reports, you do your self-studies and all of those along the way. That provides that context within your goals. If you're a brand new program, your assessment's gonna look very different than if you've been here since ISU was founded. There's gonna be a slight difference there. Make sure you identify both strengths and weaknesses. Instead of weaknesses, you could say identify strengths and opportunities for improvement. Think about it that way. As you look at opportunities for improvement, don't look for symptoms. Dig deep so that you can get to the root cause. Like Ryan's example, if it was about citations and you were using research studies and this group just did really bad with citations, is that really what's going to not have them meet that they can design research studies? It's a component, but in the big scheme of things, it's a minor component of things. And focus on findings that can link to action. We are great at identifying lots of opportunities for improvement and nothing we can do about them. So, looking at our psychology example, they came up with this analysis of their data. On the template, personally, I like looking at the grid. So that's kind of where I focus, and you will see that this analysis is in that grid section. So 68% exceeded or met expectations based on the rubric. Nice identifying that. But based on the rubric, that's an improvement, but the rubric obviously also differentiated between hypothesis formulation and defining variables. So the analysis is, they're having a hard time connecting the theory to measurable variables. And Christine, it looks like you have a hand.
Yes, I'm in the math and stats department, and we just got done with a lot of evaluation. Do we need to list our rubrics and as well? Because where I'm just seeing meet or exceed expectations. When we were grading, we just said meet, approach, and failed.
That is the typical program assessment rubric in terms of that. So depending on how you approach something, some departments combine their grading rubric and their assessment rubric, but in program assessment, that's really what you're looking at is a 3 or 4 level meets expectations, exceeds, approaching, does not meet. Each department describes what those levels are.
Okay, we had a hard time thinking of anything that would exceed expectations was trying to solve a math problem.
Yeah, that's why each department gets to define their own levels. So, very well.
Christine, if you really are pressed upon to come up with some exceeds, maybe something like can articulate, like can not just can perform, but can also explain, like that sort of metacognitive. That's one of the things that I've seen people use for exceeds.
All right, thank you.
Sure.
So what are your insights in terms of this analysis based on what you saw? Christine was saying, do we need to see these rubrics? Not necessarily, we're looking at a bigger picture. How well do you think their analysis did based on what you can see in the annual report?
They said there was an improvement from the previous year, but they didn't necessarily have the same situation in place. Are they saying, given we have a new rubric, given that we have a new program, it's much better?
So there were some questions in terms of what happened the previous year.
Yes.
So, which ties into exactly what we're looking at is documentation of actions in closing the loop. So, Christine, you're not a plant, but that was perfect. Excellent question. Which is another thing, looking at this report, do you have any questions? And Christine came up with a great one. It's like, okay, wait a minute, this is a new rubric. I'm missing some context here. So the annual report is supposed to give you a snapshot of time, but you do need to make sure there's sufficient data in there. So we're going to jump to the last step, which Ryan is going to talk about.
Yep. And so the last step is ACT. And some of the key ways to help make sure that you're translating your insights to action, these are some of the key principles. First of all, make sure to create specific and measurable improvement actions. if you were here for some of the earlier workshops, they really focused on making sure to have measurable improvement actions. We can discuss what makes something measurable here as we need to, but just to sort of briefly recap, something like understand, which is purely internal to the student or the learner, is extremely difficult to measure. So you want to make sure that whatever you're trying to make sure you're measuring is something that's externally observable. You also want to make sure to ensure that your actions directly address the assessment findings. You also want to make sure to document the connection between data and actions. As Lisa was saying, it's really often that people do act and do have really good ideas for interventions. They just don't always document that as neatly as possible. So that's one recommendation for improvement. Also make sure to assign responsibility and timeline for implementation. Plan in advance for follow-up assessment to measure the impact. You want to make sure that whatever interventions you're making actually you can show that they are working. Hopefully they will. If for some reason they're not doing what you hope, then you know you can go ahead and switch and do a different type of intervention. And then finally, make sure to close the loop by reporting on the effectiveness of your actions. And what I have seen in the library context is sometimes people will hope that one type of intervention will work and people will get better at finding more scholarly appropriate sources for college use. And if that doesn't work, in my experience, external accrediting bodies want to see that you're trying. They don't really need to see immediately that you've succeeded. So if you say after 3 years, that didn't work, we're going to instead try this other thing, you don't have to wait for the entire 7-year accreditation cycle to switch. They just want to make sure to see that, yes, you take this seriously. Yes, you're keeping track of what you're trying and you're pursuing interventions that will lead to student success. That's at least with the assessment bodies that I've seen, the approach that they take. So, which is a very different approach than what most people who become professors expect of themselves, which is, I have always succeeded, I will succeed at this, and I will do so quickly. Instead, that sort of, we're floundering or we're making guesses that are informed by data and informed by being knowledgeable adults who've paid attention to things. But if it doesn't work the first time, figuring out some other thing to try to address seems to usually be a very acceptable approach. So let's look again at our case study with the action planning. And here, if you remember, having analyzed the results, this fictional psychology department, what they chose to do was they developed targeted workshops on their hypothesis formulation and on defining variables. And also they chose to implement this not just in one class, but in 2 of them, so that students would have repeated exposure to these workshops. And they created a peer review process for their research proposals that uses the rubric. So thinking about the principles that we've been discussing, how well do we think that these particular actions that they've chosen address the issues that they identified? Do they seem pretty clearly connected, or does it seem like they're sort of off base? Hi, Christine.
How well does peer review work in, let's say, a statistics class or a math class?
It depends, it'll come back to your outcome. So whatever your student learning outcome is. So in this example, the student learning outcome is designing research studies. So that is the outcome. And the faculty used the new rubric, which you caught and pointed that they used a new rubric. And they're like, okay, let's give the students an opportunity to use this same rubric, but earlier in a peer review place. So it's all connected back to that student learning outcome. So in terms of math and statistical analysis and things like that, one, I'd look at your outcomes. Do you have an outcome that lends itself to some sort of peer review process? You can think of ways of like, there are some mathematical problems and some science problems. It's like, think of 3 different approaches to this, and you could have students provide feedback on the different approaches, but it all comes back to what your learning outcomes are.
Okay. Thank you.
It's a great question. So thank you.
Before we move to the next one, so noticing that it wasn't documented in the report that the previous year they had 52% on this, and then they designed a new rubric. Looking at this data, my guess is they designed a more detailed rubric. So whereas before they might have had an overall rubric, they're like they wanted to dig deeper so you can see that logical flow, but that wasn't necessarily documented. So what does this look like? You've seen it in the case study, but on the next slide, it just goes in the grid in there in terms of what you did. Here's your student learning outcome, here's your assessment method, your data, your results, your actions. Most departments do kind of have a cycle in terms of what they look at. Notice that this student learning outcome, all right, here's this is what we're gonna do, and here's the actions. So then the following year, you would close your loop by saying, last year, we did this, and this is the results. And then you move into the major assessment if you're on one of those cyclical patterns of your assessment. So it looks like a bunch of cycles moving through that you follow up on, close the loop. Did the workshops work? Did we see an improvement? In terms of measuring in those actions, maybe they just focus on, you know, the hypothesis development and defining variables. Did that move? And that's okay for closing the loop. You don't need to do the whole big assessment again because you're closing the loop of trying to find something, and then you make a plan for the next cycle. So looking at this in our template, one of the reasons we're having this workshop, the next slide, is the APRA is due in just a little bit. So make sure that you have this in. There's a template for you. And that can all be found on the ISU.edu assessment website to make sure that you pull these pieces in. The template is pretty straightforward. And UARC is making to make it simplified and as explicit to guide you. But ultimately, assessment is for you. So like Ryan said, most accrediting bodies don't care if you fail or succeed. They care if you do or do not. So do. Didn't need to bring Yoda in there, but you need to try something and document that process. So let's see, we have a couple of here. We are now going to look at, we thought about if there was lots of us to break into groups, but there's not that many of us. So let's open up the business example. And we'll give you about 3 minutes to read through that one. Keep in mind, what did they collect? Where is their analysis? And how did they act? That's the closing the loop part.
So it's been about 3 minutes. If you've got, if you desperately need more time, please raise your hand. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and start discussing a bit more. So yeah, let's go ahead and see what key insights did you notice from the data analysis?
This time it was all students in one of the classes, no sampling.
Found that out both times, Kaylin. What's the difference for you from that perspective?
Um, that's a great question. I like the all students, but it's so hard to do that all the time because it just takes so much work. Random sampling, they've proven through research, is adequate. It just feels like, though, that you miss somebody when you don't have all.
Something to keep in mind and something to consider when you're looking at how to collect data.
But yeah, I think you're right that the making sure that it's at least, if you are taking a subset, making sure it's random as opposed to other data collection methods like snowball sampling, where it's sort of like one person gets the survey and passes it on and another student. So then you're really just sort of accidentally surveying smaller cohorts within the entire population. It's that I think would be problematic. But I think if you are going to try to have just a smaller subset to make the analysis more comfortable to do and make it so you don't have to do all 300 students in the program, instead only do 40, then yeah, make sure that it's a random sample.
It makes it doable when you do random sampling as opposed to 300 students in-depth
Right.
analysis.
Right.
What else did I notice? Let me review quickly.
Yeah, Christine.
I really liked how they included what they did in the back, in the previous year. You know, their findings from the previous year, their plans, and how they followed through. I didn't think the first case study really highlighted what was going on before. And I like the fact that they realized there were problems in the middle of the semester.
It did feel more project managed, I guess is the way to say it.
Do you think in a good way it was? Okay.
I think that they achieve better outcomes that way.
Yeah. And was that, why do you think it was more project managed? What features made it feel that way for you?
Well, just like what Christine said, is they gave you the I gotta reload that. They gave you the background for it, and then they gave you the action steps of what they were going to do, and then they identified who was going to do, in what classes. So, like the 6 new case studies, that's a project, that's a thing, an action. And then when they incorporated it and they came back to look at the results, the analysis, that's when evaluations with interventions for problematic teams, that's them doing their analysis of that one project or that one part. So
Yeah, great. Thank you, Caitlin.
and they have action steps for what they're going to do next.
Yeah, so as the external accrediting body seeing this, I think this department's now making it so that the accrediting body doesn't have to connect the dots on their own or try to interpret too much. It's as spelled out as possible. Here's a very simple story. You know who the actors are, you know the actions, you know the context as for why, and that just makes it maybe not as literary of writing, but that's probably what we want in this instance. You don't really want a whodunit. You want this is what happened. It's very easy to follow.
And I'll jump in here. The annual reports are all internal, so they're for us at ISU, but they do prepare you for those accreditation visits. But these reports are also for your department. So make them beneficial to you as opposed to just a box checking item. Think about your accreditors and your accreditation process, whether you have a specialized accreditation or you are a non-specialized accredited program. But these assessment annual check-ins should support you in your overall long-term goals. With this example with business, you know, the one where they're having problems mid-semester, that one thing could go the full 7 years trying different patterns. And by documenting it clearly, just in your annual reports, oh, you just have to go to your annual reports to kind of pull things together and prepare yourself for those mid-cycle and the full cycle reports. So you should have sufficient data for you in your department, as well as for any turnover. The other day I was listening to someone talk about AI, and one of the problems with an AI prompt is that you make the assumptions that they know about you. And since this is an internal report, I think we also make assumptions about what is known at ISU. But think about your reports as for somebody new coming in, what would you leave behind if you left in the middle of a cycle so that the assessment can follow a continuous process of improvement.
Yeah, so along those lines, things that I've seen back at the College of Western Idaho, sometimes people would make sure to include the rubrics when they changed, so they could say, here's the old version that we no longer want to use, and here's the improved version for this particular capstone assignment for this program. Those sort of things that everyone in the department would know that year because they're all sweating it. But 5 years down the line, if it's somebody else trying to make sense of the data, leaving it there, having it attached, sort of like an appendix that helps you make sense of it afterwards, can be really kind, either to yourself or to whoever else is involved in the process in the future. So nobody else seems moved to keep talking about this. So I will go ahead and have us think of our key takeaways. So first of all, really, we hope you agree that assessment is only valuable if it leads to action. And the assessment data process provides a systematic approach. Again, that's collect, analyze, and act. And since we're doing key takeaways, I'll read each of those out in full. Collect meaningful data that's aligned with your outcomes. Analyze that data to identify actionable insights, and then act by implementing specific improvements. Third, you want to document the connection between your findings and your actions. And fourth, close the loop by assessing the effectiveness of your actions. And then Lisa is going to let us know about some of your next steps.
So we're inviting you to act, because that's what we're looking at, is action. So take a moment and review your current assessment data. I know you already are doing that. The fact that you are here means you have questions, and you probably have been tasked with assessment. And look and see, make sure, have you done all three things? Have you collected and analyzed and created an action plan? It's okay if you haven't. Now's the time to say, oh, we don't have an action plan. Let's create an action plan. Write it into your plan. Make sure that you document at least one concrete action and use your template. If you need help with the APRA template, you can reach out to Doug and to Shuyan for help with that process. So there are 2 other case studies in there too, if you want to look and explore those. They're all made up, but don't take them as perfect examples. Okay, use your analysis hat and going through, but there's some examples there. So questions, comments? We probably have about 5 minutes.
Quick question. What was the November 1st deadline?
Every program needs to submit their annual program review. That's the APRA template is due November 1st. And whoever's in charge of assessment should have been getting emails from Doug.
Patrick should have gotten an email about it. Christine.
I'm not the one in charge. I'm just the one that's insisting on line item analysis.
Well, thanks for joining us then today, Christine, even if you're not the one who's in charge of it. A double thank you.
Thank you very much, you too. That's great.
Good. Kaylin or anyone else? Questions or? Nope.
I have training Friday.
Excellent.
You'll learn a whole lot more. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all for joining.
Did that help?
Yeah, our program is so unique in that we're given a long